Now, what about other lake monsters like Champ, Ogopogo, and didn't Job see a vision of the dragon in the sea?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Job did indeed see a vision of the dragon in the sea. The dragon called Leviathan, and he's so beautifully described. The lake monsters of the world, there are several. In County Galway in Ireland, there's a lake where people see their local dragon all the time. In Lake Champlain, on the border between New York and Vermont, there's a huge sea monster, or lake monster, called Champ, and hundreds of people have seen him. He comes up out of the water. He is viewed, and then he disappears. They launch investigations. Nobody ever sees anything. There's in Cornwall, in England, there is a lake monster that is regularly seen. And cryptozoologists, with their little microscopes and binoculars and cameras have chased these monsters and never been able to catch one, because I think that they are just beyond this dimension, occasionally able to be witnessed. There's a fascinating thing. In fact, there was a book written by a gentleman, F.W. Holliday wrote a book once, and I can't remember when it was published, but the name of the book was The Dragon and the Disc. And Holliday, who was an English gentleman, referenced all of the instances in which dragons were seen to interact with flying discs. And he catalogs literally hundreds of such sightings down through history. And there's one that we all know about, and the next time you go into a Chinese restaurant, I want you to look at the dragons that are hanging around on the light fixtures and so forth and so on, and you will always notice that just in front of the dragon's mouth is a little fiery disc. And I once asked someone from China, what is that disc in front of that dragon's mouth? And I was told that, according to our religion, is the knowledge and intellect and wisdom that the dragon once possessed, but it was taken from him, and he has forever been chasing it since. So you always have the dragon with the fiery disc just in front of his mouth. He's seeking to reunite himself and to regain his power, his lost power. And I think, isn't that fascinating? Because, in our Western lore, we have things like dragons, things like Bigfoot. And Bigfoot, too, is often seen in the company of flying discs. As you know, you've probably read all the accounts yourself.
Right. Well, and on this question that except for rare appearances where they turn up, people chase them, try to capture them, then they're gone. It's like they're moving in and out of a higher dimension.
Yes.
But they continue to remain just beyond the reach of our vision to be able to capture and study one. But I'm looking back into your article again, the February edition of Prophecy in the News, the lead story by Gary Stearman, The Extraterrestrial Question. And on page 10, you say, today, however, under conditions in which the influence of God's Holy Spirit is diminishing, there is a quickening of their appearances, giving credence to a false scenario. First of all, I want to tell you, when I first read that the other day, it put a chill down my spine. Just the way you wrote that, under influences in which God's Holy Spirit is diminishing. What a frightening thought that is. But as it is, more and more of these manifestations over the past couple of decades are looming, giving credence to a false scenario. What was you talking about?
The false scenario is seen in so many different ways. One of the things I mentioned was movies. I will never forget, when I was 14 years old, a movie came out. It's called The Day the Earth Stood Still. Flying saucer lands in Washington, D.C., and this very handsome space traveler with his absolutely phenomenal robot called Gort steps out, and he comes forth with a proposal. In fact, he comes forth with an ultimatum. He addresses an assembly of the world's leaders, and he announces that unless they find peace and give up the nuclear arms race, Earth will be reduced to a burned-out cinder. And yet it sets a kind of a trend in what I call hits from outer space. You have E.T. the Extraterrestrial. You have Flash Gordon. You have Star Trek and Star Wars. And you have the old grade B movies from the 50s, Earth versus the Flying Saucers. And they all carry a theme that humanity is corrupt and evil. Unless it mends its wayward ways, the extraterrestrials are going to have to step in and set things straight. And the extraterrestrials, of course, are the dark side. From our perspective, from their perspective, they are the saviors of the earth. We think of Close Encounters of the Earth, of the first kind, or of the third kind, and we have the mothership, and we have, appearing as great peacemakers from beyond here to oversee and to revamp the evil ways of mankind. So we're right in the middle of a giant propaganda war, and that's part of what I meant by under the conditions in which the influence of God's Holy Spirit is diminishing, there is the rise of this incredible flood of propaganda. I read the other day that there are now 32 movies in production in Hollywood on the theme of extraterrestrial saviors from outer space. And of course, we just came through Avatar, Avatar, in which we have giant, beautiful creatures on another planet who are superior to humans in virtually every way. And the humans are pictured as savages. The extraterrestrials are pictured as spiritual superiors. But in fact, anyone with a half a gram of knowledge about the Bible would instantly recognize them as pagans. So we're in the middle of a propaganda war.
Well, I jump back just for a second. I always wanted my own Gort to deal with those nasty school bullies.
Yes, indeed. Oh, yeah, it'd be nice to have a Gort at your side.
Just every once in a while. I mean, you don't really want to destroy the world, but once in a while you need a Gort. Hey, we've got about 7 minutes left. Where is this going, Gary? What's on the immediate horizon that you think people should be aware of?
What I think people should be aware of is a kind of a Mephistophelian bargain between today's intellectuals and our alien visitors who are now being courted both by science and religion. The Vatican Conference, there was an MIT conference on Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind back in, I believe, 1992. It's amazing how many scientific and religious figures are now banding together and courting, if you will, those whom they believe to be our saviors, namely visitors from outer space. And this perfectly fits into the secular model. In the article, you may have noticed that I went into a little history about Dr. Francis Crick, discoverer of human DNA. And Crick, after years and years of experimentation, adopted the idea of panspermia. That's a 1908 idea that says that man was created when intelligent life elsewhere seeded the universe, and the seeds sprouted on various planets. Well, Crick said the probability of a human protein randomly forming in the proper sequence is about 1 chance in 10 to the 260th. And when you consider that the total number of elementary particles in the universe is only about 10 to the 80th, Crick says, well, one can see that the probabilities of spontaneous generation of life are virtually non-existent, impossible. And so at the end of his life, Crick adopted this idea that intelligent extraterrestrials seeded human life. Now, Crick is one of our most exalted Nobel Prize winners, Tom, and he is the model for modern science, which is now leaning in that direction. And if an ultra-terrestrial stepped forth and offered them his hand, I'm sure they would accept it.